few survived the slaughter of Bleakhallow, and those who lived did so with the curse of the goddess Helena. The rage that destroyed a city in one night was now free to spread. The carnage carved a bloody path through southwestern Azura, and with every passing of the lunar cycle, the beastly rage would consume its host again. Villages, towns, even the city of Light's Reach was threatened. Roland, the city's lord, did what he could to curb the bloodshed, and even organized monthly hunts in order to snuff out the monsters that prowled in the darkness. Unfortunately, once the night of the full moon had passed, the beasts were gone, transformed back into their original forms, able to blend in with the public, unsuspecting until the next lunar cycle. However, over time, some of those afflicted with the blood curse had grown weary of their burden, and had handed themselves over for execution, knowing that there was no cure for their suffering, nor the suffering that they had inflicted. Some had even turned over information on others, who were killed without trial, for the cost of keeping them alive was too great a risk. But there are always those of good intent, who wish to understand, cure, and rehabilitate. After a year of monthly attacks, a company of Helena's priests, hailing from the eastern city of Dagron, had caught wind of the strange goings-ons, and journeyed to Light's Reach with the intention of learning about and understanding the curse that plagued their lands. It made sense, for Helena's priests were healers and philosophers. But could humble acolytes cure what their goddess had created? Was it heresy to undo their goddess's punishment? Or was it that they did not know the origins of the curse, and only wished to do their duty? Not wishing to snub the offer of aid, Lord Roland allowed the Order of Priests use of an unused barracks just south of the city, along with 50 soldiers and however many assistants and hires that they needed. The Order was also given full access to the bodies of the curse bearers to examine for useful information, though the beasts reverted back to their old forms after death. Unfortunately, there was not much in the way of insight from examination and dissection, other than a common mark between each of the bodies, a ring of symbols, somewhere on the host's flesh, circling some kind of tribal image, which one of the priests had said looked like a wolf. Now the Order had something to base their research around, and a call was put out to every village and town in the area, as well as the city of Light's Reach. All must report to a chosen authority, where they would be inspected for the mark, unbeknownst to them. This would indeed fool some, who did not know they had markings, and they would be locked up, then callously dispatched. This did not please the Order, as they wished to delve deeper into the curse and figure out how to cure it. Unfortunately for them, Lord Roland gave strict orders to kill any who bore the markings. However, there were those who had begun to take a fancy to their curse, able to fully embrace the freedom of their beastly desires. These people were all too aware of their marks, as they had grown to revere them. This allowed them time to retreat from any built-up areas that they may have been staying in, and keeping them hidden from the Order of Helena. It would be those who embraced the blood curse who would show the Order exactly what they were dealing with. Month after month the hunts continued, and month after month the Order of Priests continued to reluctantly examine the bodies of the curse bearers. But as time went on, the hunts were returning with more casualties than kills. This was distressing for Lord Roland, as well as the priests, for they were convinced that if they could examine a living specimen, then they were certain they could figure out the intricacies of the curse and ultimately create a cure. Hesitantly, Lord Roland agreed and proclaimed that the next hunt would give them a living sample. Between full moons, under the cover of darkness, the priests of Helena worked with the Lord's forces to craft elaborate traps in the forests, in trees, pits, and even some caves. They were very public about the next hunt, hoping to lure a few of the cursed ones into their traps. This time, the priests would join the hunt and, this time, they would face the horrors that prowled in the moonlight. On horseback, a company of 40 soldiers and 4 of the priests set off into the forest as the full moon began peeking over the tree line. Other than the white wisps of light weaving through breaks in the canopy, the only illumination was that of the torches that had been lit throughout the party. The further into the forest they got, the more nervous the horses got, becoming more difficult to handle, slowing down no matter how hard the riders tried to push them. But, in reality, most of the riders were just as terrified as their steeds after months of losing comrades and friends, witnessing their mutilated bodies at the hands of enraged beasts. But before any horse could bolt, they closed in on their prey as howls pierced the night air and distant scratching drew ever closer. It was their eyes that they saw first. Some yellow, some red, but all of them deadly and thirsty for blood. They were close to the floor, on all fours, their claws rustling amongst the dirt as a chorus of low growls filled the air. But one stepped forward on 2 legs, and the priests finally got to see the true form of the beast curse. A wolf-like snout, pointed ears, elongated arms with huge claws, and covered head to toe in thick, black fur. The beast stood around 7.5 feet high, and stood unmoving, staring at the company. Knowing that they must move fast, or it would be they who were trapped, the soldiers turned around and rode for their lives as the beast howled, with several others joining in before their own hunt commenced. The group followed a tight path, with there being no room for error, as they weaved along the dirt road, awaiting the perfect time to spring their plan. With their heightened strength and stamina, and with no reason to stick to the path, it wasn't long before the snarls and howls began gaining on the party. With only a little further to go, the first victim was claimed, as a rider was removed from his horse and his torch snuffed out. But none looked back after him. None even dared. They had a mission, and it had to be stuck to. The first marker had been reached, and 5 riders split off from the others, into the trees, almost consumed by the dark of the night, if not for a single torch. The second marker had been reached, and another 5 riders split from the company. As the main group continued, it wasn't long before there were screams in the distance, as well as a sharp yelp. They would not know until morning if their comrades had been successful, and there was no time to think any longer on it. Each marker sent another 5 riders into the darkness, and the growls and snarls continued to close in. The night was long, and there had not been a single confirmed kill on a beast. 8 parties entered the forest and, by morning, only 4 returned. At least 20 good soldiers fell prey to the creatures that hunted them. The priests made no friends that day, for, in their search for a living sample, the night's hunt had left them with more corpses than any other. Fortunately for the priests, their efforts had not been fruitless. 2 of the surviving parties had managed to kill a few of the beasts with their traps, but the other 2 had managed to retrieve their quarry. By the light of day, the monsters of the full moon were nothing more than men and women, and none were particularly threatening. One of the men was young and wild, though not especially big, who kept fighting the guards that restrained him, whilst the other was an older man who was still and silent. The 2 women were twins, with long black hair and pale blue eyes, both dressed exactly the same, which the soldiers guessed was a clever tactic to confuse and mislead. The examinations persisted for weeks, with no more information than they started with. Confused and frustrated, the priests' exams had begun to devolve into experimentation and, some would say, torture. After finding that the curse-bearers healed quicker than regular mortals, Helena's acolytes began living dissections in the hopes of finding something, anything. It wasn't even about breaking the curse anymore, and education had fallen away to the basest of pride. The screams of pain and anger filtered through the barracks, causing uneasiness within its walls, though one always stayed silent: the older man. No matter how they cut, pierced or burned, no sound passed the man's lips, which always unsettled the priests. The lunar cycle was reaching its apex, and the final sunset before the full moon was drawing to an end. The man finally broke his silence as he was being chained up for the night.
I cannot fathom your reasoning for keeping us locked up in here. You sorry fools. You'd be wise to kill us now, or none of you will live to see another night.
But the warning went unacknowledged. Were the priests so confident in their chains and bars that they thought themselves safe? Was it that their obsession had blinded them to the passing of time? It did not matter, as the day's light began to fade, and the man was left in his dark cell.
The rage calls to me. The rage fuels me. The beast will not let me go, and I will not let it go. The blood curse will consume all, as the blood curse has consumed me.
The man chanted slowly. One of the guards peered into the inky cell, the man's silhouette barely visible in the dark, as he began chanting again, but this time the others began to chant with him. As the frightened guard peered deeper into the cell, the unsettling eyes of a blood-hungry beast stared back from within the darkness. The guard gave his all to stay steadfast in his duty, but his armor started clattering as his legs began to tremble. The man in the cell began laughing as his skin started to tear and his bones started to crack. The laugh gave way to a howl as the ring of twisting metal became a shattering clash across the stone floor. The guard ran, his legs barely carrying him down the hall as his mouth failed to call for help and an almighty crash hit the cell door behind him. The carnage was brutal. The barracks were awash with blood and flesh and bone. The howling of beasts pierced the night air as the pack gathered in the courtyard. The scent of gore was thick in their nostrils as they revelled in their massacre. The the bodies, what was left of them, were strewn across the barracks. Many were still in their beds when the slaughter began, but the screams of those who witnessed their doom would have terrified the most jaded warrior. The priests were amongst the unlucky ones. They barricaded themselves in their quarters in a feeble attempt to stave off their inevitable demise. More than a dozen sad cadavers lay at the open gates, perhaps an escape attempt, so afraid of the beasts within their walls that they did not consider the beasts on the other side. The night was done, and a final welling of howls of triumph declared that the bloodshed was over for another cycle. However, an ominous growling sounded from the main gates. All eyes turned as 4 riders entered the barracks, whose demonic steeds trampled the corpses that lay in their way. None of the beasts attacked, and some even looked frightened, as the riders halted their otherworldly steeds, whose breath steamed in the cold air, and oily black drool run between their rows of razor-sharp teeth. Their manes and tails looked to be ablaze, and their 6 red glowing eyes could halt an army in their tracks. The riders were silent. They waited as the beastly pack that surrounded them fell to a knee, and all that was left standing was their leader, who was the last to kneel, placing his clawed fist over his chest. 2 of the riders each held a lantern, which glowed a sickly, unnatural green, and, with no words uttered, the 4 of them turned and left, with the pack of blood-cursed beasts close behind. They left the barracks at the behest of the 4 mysterious riders atop their demon horses, entering the forest, bathed in the strange harlequin glow of the lanterns, leaving nothing but death in their wake.